Testing here. Testing here.
You guys are probably better at what we're talking about, but Professor Van Man is talking about and how you interact with on a more emotional level with technology and with robots. Dr. Evans is talking about I do know this, I just told Isabel that you're watching. Would you like to?
Yeah, so it says the way that we shape our own reality, our minds shape reality, and so augmenting the mind in some sense can open up new realities.
Who is talking about experience researcher and involving the people that were actually aiming to use this technology for research for in the actual process of researching. Dr. Black is talking about research.
Yeah. I
We
mean,
didn't really decide.
yeah. So I think I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my observations and thoughts working with animals in research, and specifically with respect to the particular organism that I work with, which is a non-modern organism. I'm going to kind of extend that a little bit into some of the techniques that we use and how we go about the questions we ask in our research, and maybe some of the implications of technology as well. I used to work a lot with mice, and I do still sometimes, but mostly now it's something called a fat-tailed duck.
What on earth is that?
It's a small carnivorous marsupial native to Australia.
I've never heard of that as a model organism. I'm
Well,
gonna
yes,
look it up.
what's not. It's a non-model organism.
It sounds cute and bitey.
It is, both of those things.
Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, and then we have Dr. Vincent who's talking about public sentiment regarding biotechnologies.
Yep.
Yeah.
I see no order.
Yeah. How
We
about
wanted it to be diverse, and it really is.
how about robots after animals? That
Okay.
probably makes sense.
That's logical progression.
Yeah. And then it sounds like Michael's might be near the end, right? I wonder.
I'm happy with that, except that I made mine like an introduction kind of thing. I was like, well, this is who I am, so tell me what I can offer here a bit.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
There's an element of that. There is a little element of here's something you have to listen to. So I'm really happy anyway. But I don't know if people had the same sort of format, just giving a sense of, hey, here's my background, so
Oh, I mean,
What's
my
in the
background is literally just this is me with bipolar disorder, but that is because it's relevant to the actual thing.
Yeah,
I have a
that's
very cute photo of me at 5, so again, it's irrelevant. But not of my actual experience or anything like that.
I don't mind going last because it's the ick factor is a feature. So if anyone says anything remotely icky, I can refer back. But it doesn't sound.
I am not philosophically trained, so I run the risk of saying something.
Okay.
Something rigorous.
Oh yeah, I mean, I didn't mean to suggest you have to. Like, if you would feel comfortable going first, that's as good a reason as any other to pick some order. But
Yeah, you can go first.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how would you think that yours would fit? I mean, they don't really fit together at all, so it's arbitrary.
They don't fit together. Yeah. I'm happy with that because I'm.
So most of the lab was.
Everyone else is probably a little bit more like finely honed and focused. So I'll
Gives
open
people
up nice
thinking.
and anyone can say whatever they want. Set the bar quite low, and then the rest you can come along and absolutely smash it.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
We should chat about wood.
And you've already put yours on the computer?
Yep.
Great.
Maybe board.
Footloose and Fancy Free, but I have
Yep.
still so much to do, and now I'm not being paid.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It's
Hello.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's all of this follow up. I'm still waiting on review. So
Yep.
I've got one person who is now overdue, and I've got all of these papers and stuff coming back with reviewer comments, some of which are very stupid. And so now I'm having to deal with that and send out postdoc cold call emails to people.
Right.
Be like, hi, Amy. You don't know who I am.
Yeah, you're in that been nice to have some more people here, but everyone's got a stupid amount of assignments, so it's good at least we've got the attendance that we've got. And thank you so much to all our speakers for coming along tonight. So we're going to start with Michael. Michael Vincent. It's professor, is it, or doctor?
No.
What are you?
Associate. Doctor.
Dr. Michael Vincent. Thank you. I'm not good with all that bureaucracy stuff. So Dr. Michael Vincent, he's in the philosophy department and looks at ethics and social philosophy and those sorts of issues. So I'll let you go ahead and give a talk.
All right.
Oh yeah, I'll put the lights down as well. Oh, you wanted the ones at the front up? You want them as they are, or put the front ones up? Do you know how to do this?
Board lights, just click that.
Oh, lovely.
Yep.
Yeah, it's the screen.
Is there lights for the screen?
Is there lights? Yeah, awesome.
Are they all the same? Okay, fine, that's all right.
Oh, really?
Oh, 2 screens.
Do we need to?
Do you want this?
Everyone's sitting this side of the room. Thanks so much, folks. So I framed this as a simple sort of getting to know you thing. I expected an audience that was a bit less familiar. There were more familiar faces in the room than I was anticipating. So I just wanted to say a bit about where I'm coming from and how what I do might be of interest. So a little bit about my journey. I got into university in the first place way back in the day, just with this curiosity about what are values and how might values be right and wrong. Does that make any sense to talk about that sort of thing? That led me by a long and convoluted path to how can a large diverse society in which people value different things function? And this was basically my PhD topic. After that, I'm now teaching a lot of professional ethics, and pretty much all of it is either healthcare related or emerging technology related. So hopefully a really nice confluence there, while trying to maintain a bit of this research. And possibly there's some suggestion of me getting involved in a project with people around this university on the ethics of next generation RNA interventions in the brain. That's a topic I know embarrassingly little about, right? So don't ask me about this, I'll ask you. But I do have to learn it because potentially there's a lot of interesting things going on there and a chance for me to be involved and see what it all means and how it's going and try and influence even the direction of that. So super interested to be here and to meet people. So can philosophers be trusted here? What I want to do is basically give you a sense of what I take the philosopher's job to be. Pete might have a different view when he gets up to speak. A sense of what we have to contribute here that is not maybe too much in tension, but nicely in tension with what others are doing. I asked, can we be trusted? Because you might have heard of this guy. He's the first one who you're introduced to often in intro philosophy. And he's famous for his arguments about the mind, even though he wasn't really he was doing sort of experiments on it, but not primarily experimental, sort of proto-science argument that the mind is very different from the brain and things like that. Am I coming to offer similar things, divorced from the work everyone else is doing and trying to lead us away from that? No. Things have changed since Descartes' time, and my project is a little bit different. Some would say a little more modest, but I'll try and stress the importance of it. So I'm not so much interested in exactly getting the story of the mind down pat forever and debunking all the other stories out there. I'm interested in the fact that there are all these different stories. There are all these different perspectives on it, and I expect people here are being trained in a certain discipline where there's a certain story of the mind, and it's a good story. It's a well-evidenced story. It's a story that has a lot of power in terms of predicting things, in terms of creating new technology, diagnosing and addressing problems. But there are a lot of these stories, and ordinary people have their stories as well. So what I want to suggest is that just as science uses models, in some sense, ordinary people do as well. Not in the same sense, but in an analogous sense. What sort of models am I talking about? What parts of our mind are us? Like, what of the things going on in our brain do we identify with? Interesting short paper that I've been talking to people a lot about lately by Cormac McCarthy shortly before he died. It was the only bit of non-fiction he ever published. It was about the unconscious, and I just find it striking because he was talking and working with all these people involved in cutting-edge research in an interdisciplinary research institute. And the way he sort of reports what he was thinking about and talking about with these people is really interesting. One thing is that he identifies with a certain part of his mind, and then there's the unconscious, which he sees as not really him, but actually quite alien, as this foreign thing in his head which he can try and communicate with, but it's certainly not him. I find that striking. Other people obviously don't see things the same way, so it's really interesting to think through, well, what do we think of the things going on in our head are really us? When do we exercise freedom, and what does this mean? So this was a big worry for the guy on the slide before, Descartes. The fear that the mechanistic account of the universe would leave no space for free will, for choice, for morality. And he was pretty keen to demonstrate that, and probably a bit too hasty maybe, to demonstrate that the mind was not hostage to the laws of physics or something like that, so we could be free. What are our failings, including our moral failings? So again, I'm just trying to invoke things that ordinary people have some kind of opinion on, even if they don't stop and think about it too much. Once upon a time, being left-handed was considered quite a failure in most of our cultures not that long ago. Obviously, much more serious one, or much more pertinent, still on our minds today, was the idea of something like homosexuality being a failing. What are the things that we feel are bad about us, or that we can, and this is a bit of a different question, that we could be held responsible for? And obviously these models, as I've called them, that ordinary people have, are susceptible to change. They can change, I take it, for the better or the worse. But they're encoded in our culture, in our language. They're subtly, often, or explicitly taught. And they're felt. They're something that shapes our engagement with the world in a very multidimensional, very deep sort of way. I'll talk a little bit more about feelings coming up. So, different scientific models might be in tension with each other. They can also be in tension with common sense. And I think this is getting to the kind of point that I was hoping to encourage people to dwell on, is this tension. If the tension is severe, it will need to be addressed. But this may take some time. And I do want to step back just to the idea of different models being in tension with each other. I think there's a lesson here not just for the engagement of the professional with the public, but there's probably some really interesting issues coming up of the engagement with professionals with each other. And this has been something on my mind as people are telling me about the RNA work. These biochemistry type people, these very lab-based people, are encroaching on some of the territory of some other specialists who have a very different account of human nature, the human mind, of how to help people. So some very different models colliding there as well. So what do I mean by attention here? We learn new things about health, about what's good for people, that are at odds with the lessons that have been enculturated into people and which they've come to have strong feelings about, which they've planned their lives around, which they've developed habits around. And obviously there's going to be a lot of friction and a lot of stickiness there, to use a couple of kind of tactile metaphors. They're going to struggle with this. So this is an issue because we live in these huge societies, and we're going back to my PhD topic here. We live in these big societies. We want to make some kind of progress. Different people want to make different kinds of progress. How do we go about that? And apologies to a couple of my students here who've heard me bang on about some of this stuff amply before. But this is a quote from someone working. In this case, this article is a little bit more focused on genetics than the mind, a little bit more on things like cloning and chimeras and stuff, but emerging technology in the biomedical kind of field. He says, the horizons of the new eugenics are in principle boundless, for we should have the potential to create new genes and new qualities yet undreamed of. For the first time, a living creature understands its origins and can undertake to design its future. The author of the article I'm quoting here, I'm citing, responds, which living creature? It cannot be the human race as a whole. They wouldn't know how to do it. There's two ways of interpreting what Midgley is saying here. At a kind of surface level, obviously, she's saying humanity as a whole can't sort of unite to become every single one of them, the biochemist who's going to do this, right? We need other people performing other roles in society, so it can't be the entire species that comes to an agreement on how to do this. At a deeper level, there's this problem, well, what if we try and involve the whole species? What if we try and get them into the decision-making process and teach them the benefits of this new direction of the new eugenics, as it's put here, and get them on board with it? That's going to be quite tricky, right? Because all these other people are just as complex. They have their priorities, they have their beliefs, their models, as I've called them. Somehow all of this has to be accommodated. So to try and to leave the most of the human race out would be quite disastrous, and Midgley goes on to say it's an unusual case of the term playing God being actually an apt way to put it. On the other hand, if we try to include the human race, I can promise you on the basis of my research that this is going to be a messy process to try and get everyone on board with some kind of step into the future. So the warning, I guess, I wanted to leave people with, and I think it's quite a pertinent one at the moment, with the attitude towards universities in much of the world, particularly the culturally similar ones to us. Unis are in decline in Britain, for example. They're aggressively under attack in America, and there's no reason to think, I mean, they're neglected here, but it could get worse. So I wanted to get people thinking about how this sort of occurs. People feel the ick factor, which the expert is inclined to reject. So there's a lot of people who feel icky about vaccination, for example. That's one that's been around for some time now. There's a lot of new ick factors coming through with things like xenotransplantation, plenty of other. The article I was citing there talks about cloning and things like that. So people feel the ick factor. They're aware that there are some possible harms and side effects, and this is pretty much always the case with anything biomedical. not 100% safe. Even the very safe things and the very effective things like vaccination, people are conscious that a side effect or a harm is a thing. But what I take to be the really troubling part is if these people feel unheard, they feel that their values and their perspectives aren't respected, if they feel like they're not listened to and they're being dictated to, people saying, I'm the expert, listen to me, and I'm not going to listen to you, that reinforces the ick factor. And so we go on. So that's the warning. I'm not claiming to have demonstrated what led us to what's going on in America at the moment, but I think it's an important one to be maybe considering when discussing emerging tech and discussing biomedical expertise with the public. I'll wrap it up there.
Thanks, Michael. We'll just grab your other microphone as well. All right, lovely. Thanks for that. Who was next? Was it? Robots were later. Oh, that's right, it was Dylan. All right, so next we have Dylan. I'll give you this one.
My animations were not playing friendly, so I might just do it straight off.
Yeah, you should be able to. You should be able to plug an HDMI cable straight in, just here. That should work for you.
Perfect.
Lovely. And there's that one. Just to. Oh, yours isn't getting recorded though, is it?
No, but I think the plan was to do it in post.
Yeah, but if that's the case, you won't need the audio. Ruben, you won't need the audio for this one, will you? Because it's being cut anyway. Because it's live. Right. So, if it's live, is that an issue here? Oh, I see.
That's all good.
Yeah. All right.
Sorry.
Brilliant.
Can't seem to click it on.
And do you prefer to speak with a microphone for? Or no?
I think I can just.
Yeah.
I think I'll project.
Brilliant. Now, are you? What's your? Are you?
We should be able to. Oh,
are you a doctor as well?
Yeah.
Lovely.
So a postdoc.
Postdoc. Lovely. So next up, we're going to have Dylan Black here, who's a postdoc, and going to talk about work. So you're affiliated with the QBI and also the School of Biomedical Sciences, and I'll let you take it away from there.
Thank you so much. So it's wonderful to be here, and so just to begin, my background is not in philosophy nor ethics, but a lot of what I do, a lot of what we do in our day-to-day life has neuroethics principles, ideas really embedded in everything that we do. So I'm very excited to hear from people with much greater expertise in this area than I, as I kind of outline some of the work that I do, mainly focused on how it relates to the animal subjects that we work with, the kinds of technologies that we use and what potential applications they might have, and like ethical applications they might have. And how we might, if in the spirit of moving past animal models, how we might think about how to go about that with respect to brain science. So, my understanding of the ethical landscape within animal research is that it can be broken down into myriad facets. That animal research is, it comes as no surprise to everyone here, an incredibly ethically complex topic, and it intends to, when we work with animals, to reflect some of the societal attitudes and beliefs that we have towards animals in research. And when you talk to researchers, they come at the question of animal work from a number of different places. You often hear arguments that will kind of have this utilitarian or consequentialist dichotomy come into how they think about their work. There are questions about the moral status of animals relative to humans. How do we think about these distinctions between some kind of legitimate needs research rather than something that might be considered curiosity-driven or blue sky? Do we think about it as morally permissible in the sense that it is the lesser of however many evils, a kind of argument out of necessity? And what role might some kind of population ethics have to play in how we think about animal work? And so one thing that I find in common with the researchers that I speak to and myself in how I kind of relate to my own work with animals is that sentience alone, this idea of, I guess, the way Thomas Nagel would describe it as there's something that it's like to be this organism, or maybe it has some relationship to an idea of phenomenal consciousness, is, I think to a lot of people, sufficient for moral consideration with respect to animals, beyond, say, the ability to reason or any specific species membership. That really it is sentience and the extent of that matters most when people relate to working with animals. So I want to share a few stories, or a few observations rather, about what I think when I work with my particular organism, which is a non-model organism that I study for the purposes of discovering developmental principles of the brain and how that relates to kind of the evolutionary history of various organisms, specifically mammals. And I find developmental neuroscience to be particularly tractable with respect to understanding how brains are made, and this is a very useful organism to answer these questions. In part because of some pretty obvious parallels to the mouse, which is one of the if not the most common mammalian organism.
emotion and virtual empathy, and finally group identity, bias, and intergroup emotion. And the kinds of measures that we use in our lab include things like using psychophysiology, and I'll tell you a little bit more about this later, but we use, like, for instance, facial EMG, skin conductance, and heart rate. We've also done studies with fMRI and hormones, and then we also do behavior and self-reports and some implicit measures as well. But going to the title of my talk, I was very much inspired by this talk, by this title and this question by my PhD student here, Jacob Shire, who came to a meeting a couple weeks ago, and he said, do you think we could actually have a robot hypnotize us? And it's because he's been working with robots a lot, and he's interested in the mind and how people perceive us in robots. And so that got me just thinking, how do I feel about that, about letting robots possibly hypnotize us? And then over the weekend, tried to do this with ChatGPT. I actually asked ChatGPT if it would hypnotize me, and we had a little conversation, and it didn't seem to have any prohibitions against hypnotizing. It just seemed reluctant because they didn't think it could do a very good job. But I kept scripting and working on it, and I finally got it to start to kick in to hypnotize me, and I got interrupted and I didn't finish. But I think I'd have to hone it and work on it some more to get it to use a better voice and so on. But the issue here about having a robot influence us that way by hypnotizing us, I think is startling to some people, because they might think that you're turning over control to the robot. And just so you know, only a small percentage of the population is really truly hypnotizable, and the rest of us probably wouldn't be able to be hypnotized by a robot or a human. But if you are hypnotizable, that means that perhaps you would fall prey to its suggestions and so on. So that gives us this concern that as robots become more and more out there in society and in our everyday life, the question is then, can robots actually behave in ways that influence us? Can they have some sort of influence on us? And I just have to tell you right away, the simple answer is just yes. We know right now, there's tons of research actually on the idea that robots can actually influence our behavior. This is the article I'm summarizing here. It comes from 2019, which did a big review of the literature at that point, just on what we already knew about how much robots could influence us. And you can go all the way from just the fact that the way they might behave affects the way we perceive their traits, like whether or not the robot's extroverted or introverted. You could have it could cause you to start to mimic it, whatever it's doing, because you want to have the robot like you, so you start to mimic it and you're not even aware of it. It can move all the way up to more bigger things, where it's like affecting your thoughts, your mood, your emotions. And so robots really do this. I'll give you some examples. Here's a study that was published just in 2023, where they had a robot receptionist, Charlie. This isn't actually Charlie, I couldn't find a picture of what they actually used. But Charlie had two different personalities at this reception desk. And so they had the robot waiting there for the human participant to walk up to Charlie. And they found that people would keep shorter distance if they thought that the robot was sort of introverted. If the robot acted in an introverted way versus an extroverted way, indicating that that robot's personality design could shift the human spatial behavior, how much they would stand away from that robot receptionist. So that's a strong example of how robot social cues could really influence our human movement and our interpersonal distance. You can also find a study that's interesting, obedience to robots. And what they did in this study in 2023 was they had participants believe they were administering electric shocks. They were all fake, to a learner in an adjacent room. This is based on a very famous study in psychology, the Milgram experiment, which I think probably most of you have ever heard about, where you go ahead and you have a teacher and they're shocking the learner whenever they make a mistake, and there's this authority figure that says you must go on, you must keep shocking the learner, even though the learner is like crying out in pain. So they're kind of seeing here if the robot would do the same thing, have sort of that effect on the teacher. The robot they chose here is a Pepper robot that you see here, so that's actually from the article. And so this authority figure would tell the participant what to do, like they just made a mistake, so you must deliver a shock. And in one condition, that authority was the robot. In another comparison condition, it was a human. Participants did obey those robot instructions in many cases, but the degree of compliance was lower than it was to a human experimenter. So we see again some influence from the robot, not as great as if it was a human experimenter. And there are other variations of this now that have been published with robots being the authority figure and looking at obedience. Now I'll give you one more example, and this comes from our lab, and this is an honors project that we had last year from Dane Hamilton and Conrad Ernie, who's in our lab group. This is just a kind of robot that we use. We use Now robots, and you can see here that Jacob and Conrad have done a lot of work with these robots. They can control their movements. They're very quite dexterous, and they can make different sounds, play music, change their voices. So we can really control lots of things about these robots. So they're quite interactive and catch a lot of attention when people are interacting with them. I'm just going to show you. It gets all the way down to where it lies down on the ground here. Right, so we can do quite a bit with these robots, and people, like I said, do find them really entertaining, and they can interact with them. So one of the first things we did with one of these Now robots is we looked at a classic that's in psychology called social facilitation theory, and this is basically what happens when you're being observed. And so this model of social facilitation goes all the way back to the 1960s, argues that when there's the mere presence of another person and you're performing a task, what happens is that person being there just causes you to be more aroused, okay? And the question then is, after you're being aroused by having this person be near you, are you actually good at the task that you're performing right now while this person's there? If you're not very good at the task, what's going to happen with all that extra arousal that happens when the person's there is you're going to be impaired. You're going to do worse on the task. If it's something you're really good at, you in fact show facilitation. You'll do better because you have that extra arousal now to kind of boost your performance, and people will do better compared to like if they're by themselves. There was a competing explanation for all these effects, and by the way, I should say that model I just presented to you was Zients from 1965. Cottrell in 1968 talked about evaluation apprehension. Cottrell basically argued that if you are being observed and someone's there, that you're kind of really just nervous about someone's evaluating you, and so that causes the arousal, then everything else is the same. So there really wasn't a difference between the two in terms of what happens after the arousal. It was just what causes the arousal. Well, what we did in our study is we had a robot present to be the observer, okay, with this human that's performing the task. And our independent variable here was really something that's kind of closer to Cottrell, which is we made the robot appear to be smart or dumb. And then we looked at how they performed anagrams that were really hard, scrambled letters, and they were hard or easy, okay? And so what we did was we had 41 university students here at UQ assigned either to the smart or the dumb robot conditions. The smart robot had appropriate responses and an introduction. The dumb robot had inappropriate responses and had off-topic feedback that didn't fit with the little interaction that was going on at the beginning of the experiment. And then we had have them do these anagrams, so the robot just sat there and watched them. And so we could look at their performance, we could measure their skin conductance, we could measure their self-report. And then, like I said, we had them doing easy and hard tasks. So this kind of just gives you an overview of how we do these experiments. Like we have a robot over here on the right. There's the person sitting in the chair while they're performing the tasks. And so just to tell you how we made the smart robot smart, we had a little script that the robot would have to follow and said, hi, my name is Now. Welcome to the experiment. What's your name? And then it says hi. And it would actually give the robot, would give that participant's name. It says patient there, but it's the participant would say their actual name. In the dumb robot condition, they would say something like, what did you think about the gorillas in the video? Can you tell me about your favorite animal video? And there was no gorillas in the video. So it was like just making responses that didn't seem to match onto the reality, and it just kind of goofed up the person's name and all that kind of stuff, right? The way that we had to do these experiments, by the way, was that we'd actually had the experimenter typing in all these responses. So there's a sort of a Wizard of Oz thing that we do here where the experimenter's in another room actually typing the responses that the robot utters. We now have moved to using AI and generative AI to do the chatting. But in this study, we had this manipulation check. We did find that the smart robot was rated as more intelligent than the dumb robot. And we did find that task difficulty mattered. That is, they actually did better on the easy anagrams versus the hard, but there was no effect of the robot's intelligence. It didn't matter whether the robot was smart or not. It also didn't matter about skin conductance. We didn't get any other intelligence effects here on skin conductance. It just seemed that everybody was aroused. We got a lot of arousal in the experiment in all conditions. And we didn't actually have a non-observation condition, which is our big oversight. But I think just having this robot here, dumb or smart, just got everybody aroused and they performed the tasks. So anyway, we didn't really find this, and so we think what might have happened here is that the task difficulty seemed to be the only important thing about how they performed. The robot was just having a mere presence effect, whether it was dumb or smart. And so maybe what it was is that even the dumb robots, they seemed something odd about them. They had to be alert and watching out for this robot that was acting that way. So we have made this sort of ceiling effect that everybody is feeling observed no matter what. So we're actually now replicating that study in a better way with a non-observation condition. I want to point out before I finish up though is that there are many different kinds of robots out there, and I'm really more focused on the behavior of robots, but you could really look at the design of robots as well. This is where our engineering friends would come in handy and talk more about different ways that robots can scare us and look better and more interesting. There's industrial types of robots, there's these more android robots and so on. So we're just going to stick with these now robots and kind of manipulate aspects about their behavior. I want to just finish by asking, why are these robots able to influence us? And I'll take a philosopher's answer here. This comes from Daniel Dennett. He basically argued that humans are instinctively seeing goal-directed behavior as intentional. So if you see a robot that's performing a task, you think, wow, it has intention, okay? And the robots move, respond, or choose, they appear to have minds. And once they're treated as agents, then we apply social rules to them, just like we do anything else out there. We show trust, obedience, cooperation. And the robots tap into these evolved cues like gaze, timing, and mimicry to guide us. So the robot designers know a lot of this stuff, and they already put that into the design of the behavior of the robot. And so the illusion of mind is enough. Consciousness isn't required. All you have to do is kind of just go on autopilot, like, hey, this thing's got intention. I'm going to go ahead and respond to it that way. So in his design space, biological and artificial agents overlap. So robots can function socially if they mimic the right cues. So he says the fact that we are products of a long and demanding evolutionary process guarantees that using the intentional strategy is a safe bet. And so our lab has continued to use these kinds of measures to look at how people respond to robots, the way they might to non-robot social stimuli. I think our central question is, what are the boundaries of how we respond to a robot versus a human? It's kind of clear that we do respond to them and are influenced by them, but we can kind of look now at the boundaries of where we stop responding to robots. And then as a follow-up a question, I think, is what can we do to resist their influence when it's needed? So maybe the question isn't whether we'd let a robot hypnotize us, but why we're so easily drawn in. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you to Professor Eric Van Man. Next, we've got Heather Cruikshank. I hope I pronounced that right.
Yeah, the Cruikshank's fine.
Cruikshank from Queensland Brain Institute.
I don't know what all these bits are. Do I have to clip them all?
That bit's just for the live stream.
How do I do it?
So
oh, it's a magnet.
Yeah.
Might almost have a PhD, but I don't know how magnets work. All right. The.
Oh.
Well, you have to just change it on the panel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Over here. Over here. So we'll go to PC, and then that will switch back to the computer.
I am not technologically inclined. Is this thing on? Probably not. Is it?
There should be a button on the side. Should be. Oh, there we are. The on's at the top there.
All right. Does that work? Yes. So quickly in response to that last speech, which was amazing, I get excited every single time I see a robot. So that might be part of the issue. There's a robot over that makes bubble tea. Yeah, I get excited every time I see it. It's just so cool. All right, so got to factor that in, just the coolness factor. All right, so my name is Heather Cruikshank on the screen. You'll see my last name is McPherson though, because I just got married, and so we're in this super fun period where I have two names. And I'm going to be talking about using lived experience, which you'll see is LE, in bipolar disorder research. Now, most of what I say actually applies to all psychiatric research, but I focused on bipolar disorder, and you'll see why. So, for those who don't know, what is bipolar disorder? Well, it is a mood disorder. Now, there are two main mood disorders. There's depression and then there's bipolar disorder. So depression, as we all know, is low mood, fatigue, you feel terrible about yourself, anhedonia, all those fun things. In bipolar disorder, you have depression, but you also get something called mania. Now, mania is a period of, it's the high period. Now, it's considered to be high energy. People think it's euphoria, but more commonly it's actually dysphoria, which is basically your feelings are just through the roof. That's the best way to describe it. You get impulsivity, risk-seeking. It's actually a very dangerous period to be in. In bipolar disorder, you can also get psychosis. You can get something called mixed episodes, which is where you get both mania and depression at the same time. And no, they do not cancel out. Instead, you get the worst features of both, where you get, unfortunately, the heightened energy and the drive of your mania, and then the hatred of yourself and the suicidality of the depression. So you get very motivated to, unfortunately, do some very bad things. And there's rapid cycling where this occurs very, very frequently. I probably should have given a bit of a warning that we're talking about some slightly heavy stuff here. So there's three main gaps of bipolar disorder research. Main one, so we've got diagnosis, management, and then the mechanisms. So diagnosis, how do we know with certainty whether someone has bipolar disorder? Now, currently, we are entirely reliant on reported symptoms. So if someone says how they're feeling, if they're feeling up or down, etc. There's no way to, go and draw some blood, unfortunately, and say, yes, this is what this person has. So diagnosis is incorrect for 40% of people who have bipolar disorder. They're actually misdiagnosed, usually with depression only. And it takes approximately 3 to 7 years for a proper diagnosis, which means people can be there for up to 7 years being not treated at all for what can be a very dangerous condition. How do we cure BD? There is no cure for bipolar disorder. And the current medications for bipolar disorder are fairly inadequate. I was going to use a different word there. They're not great. They have horrific side effects and they don't work for most people. And finally, what causes bipolar disorder? Now, if we can figure out the bottom, we should be able to figure out the other two. Now, why do I care about bipolar disorder? I have it. And so when I'm talking about mixed episodes with such certainty, it's because that is what landed me in hospital twice. I have bipolar disorder 1, and I was diagnosed almost 8 years ago today. And I've been having symptoms of bipolar disorder from the age of 10. So psychosis, so in my case, hearing voices, since 10. Mania since about 13 or 14, and depressed at 17. And then I was diagnosed at 21. So that 3 to 7 years is pretty damn accurate. So yeah, 4 to 7 years to be diagnosed. Cute little me, I've most likely had traits of BD right from day dot. And mostly it showed up in my sleep. Now, this is what actually has inspired all of my research, is my own personal experience. And I've actually used my personal experience as someone with bipolar disorder to guide my research so far. And that is what I'm going to be discussing, is how we can use our personal experiences of something horrific and try and turn them into something good, and how useful that can be. So I basically I remember I have had poor sleep my entire life. I was a pain to my parents because I would not sleep even as, a 1-year-old. And that has gone on for my entire life. And I've often had issues with things like sickness and inflammation. And looking back, that's when I started putting things together. And that's how I ended up working on with my PhD. So what is lived experience? So lived experience, you'll hear a lot in the psychiatric field. It's getting very big. Now, if we talk about the formal definition from, I've used one from the DVA, probably should have referenced it, but it's there. It is a first-hand, life-changing experience that affects your view of the world and or your place in it, which leads to a process of meaning-making, which is very vague. When we're talking about it with response to mental health, however, it's literally just someone who has personal experience of the mental illness so someone who's been diagnosed with a condition, or, and this is very important, a family member, friend, supporter, or carer who has experienced supporting someone with a mental illness. Now, the most important thing in lived experience that a lot of people don't understand is that researching a mental illness is not the same as having it. And this is something I encounter constantly within psychiatric research and biological psychiatry, is I come face to face with people who they have researched my condition for years and years and years, and then they talk with me and they're like, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. And they have made assumptions based on years and years and years of clinicians or researchers who are all working off what's ultimately inaccurate information and misinformation and misconception. And so that is why it's important to talk to people who actually have the condition and then use that to shape your research. Now, this is being done in a lot of different ways. And like I said, it's not just bipolar disorder research. You'll see it in addiction, in depression, in schizophrenia. It's actually getting very big in schizophrenia. It's about focusing research priorities. So you might get researchers who are going, you know what is really important that we research? We need to keep researching lithium because we know it's currently it's the gold standard drug for bipolar disorder. We need to really focus on that. You talk to someone with bipolar disorder, like me, and I go, lithium's terrible, please move away from it, because it doesn't work for most people, and the people it does work in, it can give you some horrific side effects. And so that's when people start going, oh, I didn't know that. Is it actually that bad to take? Yes, trust me, it is. And so that then may make people think, oh, we should maybe focus on something else. Actually, a big problem that I face is sleep. I would love to find more ways to improve sleep. Oh, all right, let's go and research that instead. Using correct language, that's been a big thing as well. So there's been a big transformation because clinicians and researchers often don't treat psychiatric patients as people. You should read some of the amazing studies from like the 1980s. They did some shocking stuff with us. Very interesting though. But the language that was used was very inappropriate. And so we're getting better with it nowadays, such as saying instead of patients, people with bipolar disorder. It's actually a big difference there. This is a big one, combating stigma and misconception. Again, treating people with bipolar disorder like we're all, volatile people who suffer from only manic episodes, who can't be trusted, who, can't have a real job. I was told that I would have to live a part-time life and that I would never be able to have a real job when I was diagnosed, which I think I've proven. I don't have a job right now because I'm post-PhD, but I think I've proven that I can, do a bit more than a part-time life. But a lot of people do believe this, unfortunately. Gaps in research and care, again, that comes close to focusing research priorities. But it's, again, talking to people and saying, what is your biggest concern? What do you have problems with? And then having that patient be like, actually, it's something you've never thought of before. And that's very important as well. And symptoms is a big one as well. So I'll give the example of me again. I have very atypical presentation of bipolar disorder because I have mixed episodes predominantly more than anything else. And so that's why it was very difficult to diagnose me, because I would have mostly depression and then I had these full-blown mixed episodes that would put my life at risk. And so when people were trying to diagnose me, they just weren't really sure about what I was experiencing. I also have autism and a bunch of other things, and that really clouds things as well. But because I was not experiencing symptoms the way that psychiatrists would assume that people with bipolar disorder were experiencing things, they would ask me questions and I would answer no, and then that would mean, oh, she doesn't have bipolar disorder. I do, I just present differently. It wasn't until I was in hospital with a full-blown manic episode, they took one look at me and they were like, you've got bipolar disorder. And I went, oh, really? This is not normal what I'm experiencing? They're like, no, why didn't you say you had mania? I'm like, I did not know what mania was. And and things like that. So symptoms is very important. And finally, of course, drug efficacy. Like I said, I'm anti-lithium for a reason. Now, so that's being done, that's very frequent. What is not happening is how to improve preclinical psychiatric research. Now, preclinical psychiatric research is mostly based on animal models, and we heard a bit about using animal models before, and there's a lot of ethics, of course, to consider. But what's happening with preclinical animal models and things like that is that, again, they're based on misconceptions and poor research, and that ends up just building up over time, and people are then building research based on bad research. And so ultimately what it means is a lot of waste of life. And so we need to try and then figure out, get a good clean animal model that we can continue using, and the way to do that is actually to talk to patients first. So, like I said, rarely received LE input, which means that the actual translational validity, so basically how well this animal model is accurately depicting this condition, that has not been properly assessed. So I'll give an example. So when I first started getting into animal models of bipolar disorder, I discovered that the most commonly used one is they'll inject an animal with methamphetamine. And apparently that is mania. And the reason they say it's mania is because lithium reverses it. And I went, that doesn't seem right to me at all, personally. I had a chat with someone who used to take methamphetamines. We did a bit of comparison and said, yeah, that doesn't feel like the same experience whatsoever. But the big thing for me with that methamphetamine model is that it doesn't show depression. So how can we consider it an accurate model of bipolar disorder if it doesn't include the most prevalent part? So that's what face validity is known as. Does this model show symptoms that are of relevance to your condition? Well, most of the time, if you ask people with lived experience, they're going to say no. And that's really important. Now, when we're talking about behavior and psychiatric disease and stuff like that, so psychiatric modeling is all based on behavior, okay? Because you unfortunately cannot go to your little rat and go, how are you feeling? And have the rat go, pretty crappy. Unfortunately, you then have to go and put them in a box and measure how they move and go, yeah, that rat's feeling pretty crappy. That's the only way to do it. So again, these behavioural tests, we have come to conclude, yes, that is relevant to this particular symptom domain without asking the people who have the actual symptoms. And finally, so it's known as predictive validity. How do these things respond to drugs, and what side effects are there? And again, using something like lithium, maybe you have an animal model that doesn't respond to lithium. That actually does not necessarily mean it's a bad animal model of bipolar disorder when 70% of people with bipolar disorder don't respond to lithium, for instance. And yet that is part of the criteria now for bipolar disorder models. If it doesn't respond to lithium, we're not even going to include it. It's just stuff like that we've got to think about. So this is actually part of the work I'm doing, not with QBI, with a different group, and is actually trying to use lived experience to assess these models. And so this is something, brand new to me. But ultimately, all of this that I've presented on is just what I've used to inform my own work. So for instance, I was inspired by personal experiences to take a new approach. So I knew that sleep, I'd had poor sleep my whole life, and I kind of went, maybe that's a part of it. And so I realized it's circadian disturbance. Obviously, I then did lots and lots of research to back up my findings, but it all came from this idea that maybe this is something we should think about. And then what I ended up doing was developing a new, I call it UCD, which I then used, I did a pilot trial to see if it would work, if I applied it to rats, to see if they would then produce bipolar-like features. And they did. They showed both manic-like and depressive-like features. And so just proving that, an idea that was born from my own experience actually works. Identified where misconceptions have led to mistakes. Current models don't include depressive features. Again, what I was just saying. And then finally, recognizing key gaps in research using my own basis. Everyone prescribes melatonin. It's a big thing. They'll just throw it at you. Oh, you've got poor sleep, melatonin. You don't have poor sleep, melatonin. And they haven't actually thought about what that could possibly do within a psychiatric patient. And so because all my circadian disturbance work, I was like, well, maybe we should think about how melatonin works. And that's led to me investigating that as well and finding that melatonin probably shouldn't be used in depressed patients, for instance. If you are curious about my work, which I have not really talked about, kind of brushed on, I have got the QR codes here if you want to take a photo of the screen, I don't mind. Feel free. If you don't, that's cool too. They will hopefully get published one day. They're all in publication limbo. And then that's me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Heather.
No worries.
Fantastic.
Bit of a
Really.
different thing. There we go.
Brilliant.
You mic me up.
There we go. Lovely. Just like that. Should be brilliant.
Thanks.
And next we have Pete. You've got a... No, you don't have a new title yet, do you?
No, just doctor.
Just Doctor. There we go. Lovely. All right.
All right. Just a
So
moment,
Pete,
and I'll get
Pete,
some slides
Pete
up
is
here.
in the philosophy department and philosopher of science.
Do we have? I should have done this before.
Oh, the PDF.
Do we have Adobe here? Acrobat. I might need to just open it if I can find it down here. Yeah, it's just going to open in Chrome, unfortunately. That's what I'm trying to avoid. Okay, fine. I'll open it in some browser.
Oh,
Will it give me a full screen?
Yeah.
Control L? No.
F11.
F11. And then will it give me
There is a slide mode.
a one screen
Maybe try the expand at the top.
here? Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then it'll give me a scroll though, won't it?
There is.
Oh, that one?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that, everyone. And then let's see whether this works.
Glad I'm not the only person with technological difficulties.
I think the university has technological difficulties. All right, good. Thank you. Sorry for that disrupted start. Okay, my name's Pete Evans. I am a philosopher of science. What I'm going to talk to you about right now is the nature of reality. And I'm going to try and make a connection between potential advances in neurotechnology and the nature of reality. And so in order to get there, we need to just set up a little bit about the role that the mind plays in the nature of reality. So some of you might have seen this optical illusion before. So tile A and tile B, square A and square B, are the same colour. Right? They're the same shade of grey. Now this is an optical illusion developed in order to show how the environmental cues that are part of this picture make our brain perceive a kind of reality that's part of the structure of the picture rather than something to do with the raw data that's on the screen. So this is just to get your juices flowing. It's an intuition pump to get you thinking about the way that your mind is playing a crucial role in your perception of reality. Now, insofar as our perception of reality is, in a sense, the reality, this means that the mind is playing some role in the construction of reality. Now, so I'll try and build this up a little bit more, but this is just to get the scene set. Okay, it was interesting. Michael went back to Descartes. Maybe it's a philosopher's thing. You always need to talk about where the idea comes from. You stretch all the way back. This is Galileo. Galileo was the first person in the Western tradition, the modern scientific tradition, to draw a distinction between the nature of the things in the world as they are and then the things that we can know about the things in the world. And he did this in his famous paper about sunspots. He spent 20, 30 years looking through telescopes directly at the sun, and this is why he went blind when he was older. And he noticed when looking at the sunspots, he realized there's only certain things that I can know about the sunspots. I can only see them, I can only surmise about their actual nature. And then he thought, well, actually, it's the same with all the things that are around me. I can only see them or feel them or smell them. I can't actually know truly what the objects of reality are. I can only know what I can gain through my senses. And then this is the beginning of the 17th century. And throughout the rest of the 17th century, including Descartes, who we saw earlier,
and John Locke, and then through in the 18th century, David Hume, we get this debate about the role that the mind plays in the nature of the world. So is the mind something that's separate from the world? This is what Descartes said. Locke said there are things that the mind overlays over our perception of the world, things like colour and texture. And David Hume said, well, actually, we need to be skeptical of everything because we don't have access to the world. We can't draw the sorts of inferences that we think we want to be able to draw about the world. And then this narrative, which is a rather crude caricature of a narrative that goes over for about 200 years, culminates with Immanuel Kant at the end of the 18th century. And Immanuel Kant kind of said something along the lines of, everyone's right. On the one hand, the world is the stimulus that provides us with the information we need to construct our models, but then we also come to the world with a set of mind-dependent categories or structures that we use to overlay the constraints that the world brings to us. And so he kind of said everyone was right in some sense. But what's important, and we kind of live in this modern paradigm created by Immanuel Kant at the end of the 18th century, where we can, and this is what Kant said, we can never really know the things in the world as they are in themselves. We can only know them as we perceive them. And in a sense, our world is the world that we perceive, just like this. All right, so now I want to jump with, that's the little history narrative, and I want to jump from there to a program in cognitive science that has been around for probably almost about 50 years, 40 to 50 years now, called the Predictive Processing Program. And you'll see when I go through the detail of what's going on here, how it relates to what we're talking about. So the idea of, and this is a rather crude picture that I've just scraped from Google Images. I'll explain a little bit about what it says. But the important part here about this picture is that it's a hierarchy. It's a nested hierarchy. We've got 2 levels or 3 levels of the hierarchy, and this kind of goes on for however many levels. The important part of the predictive processing program is to point out that human brains are not computers. We don't feed them with input and then they chug away and process some output. So we might think that that's a crude way that we work. We have sensory organs and physical processes come to our sensory organs and stimulate them, and then our sensory organs send those stimuli to our brains, and our brain then processes some experience of the world. Right? So that's some crude or naive picture. The predictive processing program says, no, that is completely wrong. That's not how the human brain works. The way that the human brain works according to this program, and of course they're one amongst many, but they're kind of very popular and have a pretty good standing in the community. The way that the mind works, or the brain works according to predictive processing, is that the brain is constantly predicting what it should see in the world, and then error correcting given the stimulus that comes in to the brain. So here's the green arrows are the predictions, and the blue arrows here are the error corrections. Now you can imagine that this is a massive nested hierarchy, huge nested hierarchy, where at one end, I guess you might call it the low end, it's with the raw sensations of the world, little pieces. We've got some model that we think that there's some kind of raw objects of some sort, and we're kind of using those stimuli. And then at the very other end of the hierarchy, we've got extremely high level conceptions of the world that might be sociological in some sense. I don't know, like democracy or freedom, right? Might be some of these predictions we've got about the way that the world works, and then we've got everything in between. And this is how the predictive processing program or model works. Now, what's interesting, and so I guess the line that gets thrown around, I think this is a line from Anil Seth, who's one of the champions of this view, is that the mind is creating a controlled hallucination of the world. It's a hallucination in the sense that the mind is making it up, but it's controlled in the sense that it's highly constrained to match the error correction that's going on in the world. And so there's part of this that's evolutionary in the human mind, that we're kind of born in some sense with the right sort of structures to latch on to the sorts of things that are going to be useful for our survival. But part of it, a huge part of it, is learned. We learn right from an infant when we start shoving things in our mouth and reaching out and touching things, the way that responses happen in the world, and we build these models about what's going on in the world. So it's a controlled hallucination. It's in some sense projected onto the world. So this is kind of the mind is in some sense making the world, but it's not just making it arbitrarily. You might think actually, and this is raw speculation, that dreams are in some sense the unconstrained projections that go on. And when our projections become constrained to stimulus, we snap back and we train in on the constraints that the world is giving us. But we also have science that adds to this. So we know lots of things about the nature of reality beyond our experience of reality. And so we can say much further things about, you know, the construction, the makeup of the table. It's actually mostly empty space in between all of the nuclei and electrons flying around the atoms and the molecules and so forth. But our experience of it is not empty space. So we're kind of projecting this materiality to things, but we know that they're constructed differently on the inside. Right. Okay. So I now want to pivot. This is kind of this idea that we project the world in some sense. The world is not entirely mind independent. I now want to talk about potential ways that we can augment our experience of the world. And so this one is kind of just an example. Rather, this isn't neurotechnology. This is just an example of ways that we can disturb the functioning of the mind, the functioning of the brain. I hope I'm not equivocating here. The functioning of the brain and or the mind that gives us a different experience of reality. So when individuals take psychedelic substances, there's some evidence to show that there are parts of the brain responsible for the formation of the formation of the model of the subject separate from objective reality, that separates the subject out from the rest of reality. So we have in our brain a model that we are somehow separate as a subject. Psychedelic substances disrupt these processes, and people that take psychedelics report feeling that they are at one with reality. They have this experience of being at one with the world, at one with the universe, or at one with the cosmos in some sense. So here's an example of disturbing brain processes and as a result, having a different experience of the nature of reality. And this shows that there are some parts that here are probably more mind dependent than we think, that may not be in reality itself. So that's an example to give you an idea of the sort of thing that I'm thinking about. Here's now a couple of examples that push further towards neurotechnology. This here is called the third thumb. I wonder actually why it's not called the second thumb. I guess you've got two thumbs, and this is the third one. And so this is research out of Cambridge. There's a wireless here connected to this woman's toes, and with her toes, she's operating this thumb. Experiments showed that at an expo, random people, old, young, in between, could come and put this thing on, and within minutes were able to use the third thumb to do really interesting stuff. Pick up blocks, play a game of Jenga, make a cup of tea, and these sorts of things. People that, and the research shows, people that have used it for many days, say 5 or 6 days, start to become incredibly adept at using the thumb and start to report very interesting experiences. So there, for instance, people who are very adept can peel a banana with one hand, open a bottle of Coke with one hand. But then there's also neurological changes. The brain starts, what did they say? It starts lessening the distinction between all of the fingers. The fingers start to become, the part of the brain that has the fingers distinguished start to kind of merge together. And then once the third thumb is removed, like a week or two later, these patterns start to form back to be more natural. So if the world is, in some sense, dependent upon what we see and use in the world, all of a sudden adding this kind of new appendage is making us think differently about the objects in the world and what we can do with them. If I'm talking on the phone, the banana is kind of useless to me. But maybe when I've got a third thumb, the banana all of a sudden is something now useful that I can grab and use and eat even though I'm talking on the phone, for instance. So that's kind of one example. Here's another example that's the same kind here. Right? We're talking about extending our interaction with the world. These are VR with a haptic glove. There's evidence to show that inside the VR model, given new extended abilities to interact with the world and with the right feedback, so there's you give the agent control in the VR world, you give the right feedback that comes through the haptics, the agent can very quickly become adept at using these extended controls in the VR world. So all of a sudden, and of course this is VR, we're not talking our reality here, we're talking a virtual reality, but it shows the power that extra control over the world all of a sudden gives us our mind model, our mind map of the world, extra degrees of freedom that it can latch onto and make changes in the world with. All right, so very quickly now, that's kind of extending, and I now just want to suggest, and this is not something that I've got an example of here because I'm not sure if there are any examples. We might be able to, rather than extend the degrees of freedom that we can control, we can add to the modes with which we interact with the world. So we have particular modalities that we interact with the world through. Our eyes are the main ones, but our hands and our ears are kind of down that hierarchy, subsidiary to our eyes. This means that we can grab onto and model the world around us through those modalities, and we build this picture of the world through those modalities. Could we imagine extra modalities that are beyond the ones that we currently have? Could we imagine augmenting the mind or the brain in some sense that would allow us to move beyond our modalities? There would be a kind of transduction to something extra in the world. Now, this would be a way that we could make reality reveal itself more to us beyond our constrained way of interacting with the world with our current physical constitution and epistemic constraints that we have. So epistemic constraints, what we can know about the world. And that's just a kind of a speculative suggestion of what neurotechnology could do. So I know I'm running short of time, but I just want to quickly point out, I just found this picture. I thought it was lovely to see. There's this baby with this spoon, and you look at all the bits that are muddy, and then you look at how much mud's around its mouth, and you're like, this baby is clearly putting this spoon in its mouth, isn't it? I guess that's what babies do. I mean, it's such a tactile way that babies interact with the world. But my point here is just to point out that we are agents that interact with the world. Our whole world is constructed out of agent-world interactions. The world isn't there for us to observe. In some sense, we bring the world about through our agency with the world, through our modes of control, and also through our conceptual projections of what's in the world. And if we can augment the agent, then by proxy, in a way, we've got a chance to open up different ways to know the world. And in this way, it can shape the reality if we can get that augmentation in the mind. And I will leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Pete. Sam, do you want to?
Well, we're going to come back and do questions.
And then we'll have a little panel event. So if you've got any good questions that any of those talks made you think of. I certainly thought of quite a few things I wanted to ask people. Write those down, and we'll get to that in just a moment.
7:55.
Lovely, lovely. That was great.
Is it filmed? Yeah, I believe they were filming it. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yep,
Check it already.
yep, it was live.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Would it be on YouTube?